This is my favorite summer dress, and let's make it together. Hi, my name is Julie and I'm professionally trained seamstress and I'm passionate about everything sewing. Today I want to show you how to make this beautiful voluminous dress, which is perfect for the summer season. Now for the pattern you have several options. You can make the pattern yourself and I have a tutorial how to do it and I will link it in the description box. Second option, you can get a ready-made pattern on my Etsy shop, which is a PDF digital pattern which comes in 6 sizes, and I will also link it in the description box. And third option, you can get my Sewing for Beginners course, and the pattern comes along with this course. So what is the difference between this tutorial and the sewing course? So this tutorial is created with expectation that you already know how to sew and have sewing basics. So for example, I will say sew a straight seam and I expect you to know how to do it. The sewing course, however, is created with expectation that you're sitting in front of a sewing machine for the very first time and I'm guiding you through each and every step very detailed. So for example, I will show you how to thread the sewing machine, how to select the right stitch, the tension, how to start the seam, how to finish it, how to press it, and how to neaten the raw edges. So if you're a sewing beginner and you want to get real solid basics of the sewing process, the sewing course is the way to go. But if you already know how to sew, this tutorial will show you how to create this dress. One more thing, if you get the pattern on my Etsy store, it comes in 6 sizes, but don't forget that there is an option to print only one size and it's much more convenient to work with the one size pattern. Okay, so let's get started with our tutorial. So we will start by putting front and back pieces right sides together and pinning at the shoulders and the sides. Now sew the straight seam at the shoulders and the sides and finish the raw edges of the sides and press the seams open. You don't have to finish the raw edges of the shoulders because we will be adding facing to the dress. At this step, I also want you to mark the opening at the back and put tiny piece of fusible interfacing just at the end of the opening because we will be cutting through it and we want to protect it so that it does not fall apart. Next, put fusible interfacing on the wrong side of the facings. Put them right sides together, pin at the shoulders and the sides, and sew with a straight seam. Neaten the raw edges of the sides by zigzag stitch or serger, and also finish the raw edge of the facing bottom with this zigzag or serger stitch. Now put bodice and facing right sides together and base stitch around the neckline. Also base stitch at the opening. Now, starting about 2 millimeters from the opening line, start sewing around the neckline. At this step, you want to place a thin strap of fusible interfacing under your sewing machine foot and while you're sewing around the neckline. Sew all around the neckline until about 2 millimeters from the opening line. With your needle down, pivot the fabric and sew around 2 millimeters from the side of the opening. Once you're going down to that bottom of the opening, select the more narrow stitch on your sewing machine and create a kind of V-shaped form. At the very end of the opening, with your needle down, rotate the fabric and continue to sew until the top of the opening, again sewing about 2 millimeters from the side of the opening. Next, remove the base stitch and cut through the opening. Be very careful at this step, and right at the end of that opening, you really want to cut as close to seam as possible without damaging it, and I usually use my smallest scissors for this task. Also, cut the top corners diagonally so that once we turn them inside out, we get sharp, nice corner. Now we will do understitching. So take your dress, put the main bodies of the dress to one side and facing and the seam allowance to another side. Now we will be sewing about 1 millimeter from the seam at the facing side and sew all around the neckline as far as you can reach. This stitch will prevent the facing from peeking out to the right side of the garment. Next, I want you to cut the excess seam allowance, and the more narrow seam allowance at this point, the more rounded and the more beautiful neckline you will get. Turn the facing to the inside of the garment, create those nice sharp corners and press around the neckline, setting the entire seam to place. This next step is very confusing, but we will finish the armholes. With a garment right side out, I want you to grab the bottom of the armhole of the main fabric and the facing like this. Then from the inside of the garment, I want you to grab the fabric like this and turn it inside out, keeping those two layers together. So now I put the pin through the seams just so that they match. Next, I take my hand needle and I start base stitching from the bottom of the armhole all up to the shoulder seam. Once this is done, I will do the same from the bottom of the armhole all to the shoulder seam from the other side. This step will be very uncomfortable. If you feel that it's getting very comfortable, you're not doing it right, and it should be very uncomfortable right at that shoulder point. So once you have base stitch around the armhole, it's time to sew, and you want to start sewing from the shoulder line down all around the armhole and return to the shoulder line from the other side. Next, we will do the understitching here as well. So again, we are pushing the fabric of the dress to the one side, the facing and the seam allowance to the other side, and we are sewing 1 millimeter from the seam line on the facing side, and sew all around the armhole, or as much as you can reach, because again, at that shoulder line it will be quite difficult to reach. Once you went all around the armhole, trim excess seam allowance and press the seam. Repeat the same with the second armhole. Now it's time to create our ruffles. So take the ruffle pieces, put them right sides together and sew at the sides. Press the seam open and finish the raw edges of the sides. For the hemming of the dress, we will do the rolled hem. So first I fold the fabric about 5 millimeters to the wrong side of the garment and I sew 1 millimeter from the edge. Once I went all around the hem, I fold the fabric again, this time about 7 millimeters, and I sew again. This time I'm trying to sew on top of that first seam. Once you made the seam, press it and let's move to the ruffles. So for the ruffles, I want you to set the sewing machine to the longest straight stitch. In my sewing machine, it's 5 millimeters. Leave long thread tails and sew about 7 millimeters from the edge of the fabric. Do not secure the beginning or the end of the seam, and leave long thread tails at the end of the seam. Make a second seam exactly the same way, parallel to first one, this time sewing exactly on the seam allowance line. Now, holding thread tails of both seams at one time, I want you to start pulling them and creating gathers. Pull enough gathers so that the ruffles fit to the bottom of the dress. Next, I want you to pin the ruffles to the bottom of the dress. Don't forget to align the sides of the ruffle with the sides of the dress. Sew all around the bottom of the dress using straight stitch. Remove those long stitches that we made for the ruffles. Finish the raw edges with either serger or zigzag stitch. Now the final step is to create the thread loop, which will create the closure for the dress. So take the hand needle and take the double thread. If you have a thicker thread, it would be perfect to use in this case. So next, I want you to grab that thread, pull it through the loop, tighten it. Again, grab the thread, put it through the loop, tighten it, and continue this until you create a long enough loop to get your button through. Once you have a long enough loop, put it back to the facing and secure with several stitches so that it doesn't fall apart. Sew in the button, and this is how the finished closure looks. Give your dress a nice final press and it's finished. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. This is a very beautiful dress. I had several of these already and they are perfect for summer season. Again, the pattern is linked in the description box. Thank you for watching and I wish you a nice day. Bye!